Good afternoon. My name is Valerie Jones, and I am the Community Relations Specialist here at dLCV. And if you want to submit an application to become a volunteer, please go to dlcv.org/volunteer. So I will also place the information in the chat box. I would like to welcome everyone to the dLCV Disability Rights and Resource Expo, Breaking Barriers, Creating Access, celebrating 30 years of the ADA. Thank you for joining this session, Making Volunteerism Accessible Again. Our panelists will discuss how to engage more people with disabilities as volunteers, ways volunteer opportunities can successfully be made more accessible, and providing remote volunteer opportunity, among other things. To find out more information about our amazing speakers, please go to the speakers tab on the 𝐋𝐚𝐰 page and click on the speaker to read that bio. And first up, I would like to welcome Ms. Allison Jones Nazar. I know sorry that she's from SOAR 365. Allison, take it away.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, Valerie, and I'm real excited to be participating on this panel today. I appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome.
So I have been in the profession of volunteer engagement for about 13 years. And generally speaking, I do believe that the ethics and the best practices that govern this profession of volunteer engagement are inherently inclusive. So let me say that again. I believe that the ethics and best practices that govern the profession of volunteer engagement are inherently inclusive. I mean, in fact, it's one of the things that I love about my job. And yet, many volunteer programs are not as inclusive as they could be or as they should be. So then the question becomes, why? Why is that so? I consider myself very lucky to be with my organization, SOAR 365, because I am challenged on this specific issue of disability inclusion in a way that I definitely was not at the other organizations where I have managed volunteers. But I know that for many of my volunteer management colleagues, there are certain realities of the profession that tend to get in the way. Now, I'm not excusing anything, but I'm just acknowledging that these realities exist because we all deal with them in one way or another. And as I said at the beginning, I have been in this profession for a long time, and I have encountered these realities again and again. And I know that many of my colleagues have as well. So first of all, you know, many of us are departments of one, and we just don't have the time to think beyond, you know, what we have to get done today or what we have to get done this week or what has to happen right now. So finding the time to think through issues and challenges like this, to develop goals, to develop strategies for being more intentionally inclusive. It's hard. It is hard for every single one of us. And I know that even in COVID times, I struggle to find time to think through things and to plan and to develop strategy. So second, many of my colleagues don't have the support of leadership or staff to be more proactively and assertively inclusive. So those are just some realities that I am acknowledging about our profession. I think, you know, going back to the support of leadership, I think inclusivity is very passive at a lot of organizations. And what I mean by that is that as long as a diversity policy statement exists, that's enough for many organizations. As long as onboarding practices appear inclusive, that's enough for many organizations. So to get back to the question that I asked at the beginning, why are so many volunteer programs not as inclusive as they could be or as they should be? I think the answer is that there's a difference between being passively inclusive and being actively or assertively inclusive. So that's just kind of my little reflection on the profession as a whole and on the challenges that many of us in this profession do face all day and every day. Like I said before, I consider myself really lucky to be with SOAR 365, which is an organization whose very mission and values are actively, proactively, and assertively inclusive. And this challenges me to always try and do my job better. So one of our values is actually striving for continuous improvement. I will say that since day one of being with this organization, I just passed my 3-year anniversary. And I'm just as happy to be with this organization today as I was 3 years ago when I was first hired. I have made the effort to learn whatever I could learn about this topic every day that I've been in my job. But I will also say that I don't consider myself to be an expert. And there will always be more that I need to know, and I can always do a better job than what I'm doing right now. We do have somebody who I consider to be an expert on the panel, and that's Jessica Weber, the second panelist. And so I hope that once I'm finished with my little 10 minutes, that you will pay close attention to everything that Jessica has to share about disability inclusiveness. These are the values of SOAR 365. And of course, on the previous slide, you saw our mission, which is in partnership with families. SOAR 365 creates life-fulfilling opportunities for people with disabilities. So disability inclusion is baked into everything that we do. And as you can see, our values, as I mentioned before, the person perspective, in volunteer engagement, we are also very person-centered. So there's a lot of alignment between my personal values, between my values as a professional volunteer engagement manager, and the values of the organization. So all of those things for me, that creates my guiding foundation. You know, between the mission and the values of SOAR 365, the ethics and the best practices of the volunteer management profession, I feel like I have a really solid foundation to very proactively and assertively strive for continuous improvement on the subject of disability inclusion. I was also recently inspired to discover the World Health Organization definition of disability, which simply states that, you know, disability is a mismatch between the person and the environment that they are in. So that to me, that really helped me to shift the way that I think about greater inclusivity. And I think that this particular definition, it's something so fundamentally different than the way many organizations think about disability, that it can really help us kind of take the next step, move up to the next level in terms of our efforts to be inclusive. This definition, by the way, is part of every orientation and every training session that I do at SOAR 365. So the research can also challenge us to do better as volunteer engagement managers. For example, according to the Supporting Volunteerism for People with Disabilities guidebook, there are 4 features that stand out in studies of organizations that attract and retain volunteers who have disabilities. And you can see these 4 features listed here, and they're kind of consecutive. So in other words, you can't be doing a great job on number 4. They actively identify and seek to remove barriers to participation. If you're not doing a good job on number 1, you're committed to accepting all potential volunteers and all of the diversity that entails. So these kind of build on one another. And I encourage all of my colleagues, as well as myself personally, to rate themselves on these 4 different features, not just once a year, but every month, every season, every opportunity that you have to evaluate your volunteer engagement efforts. Because I think these are 4 concepts that we really think deeply about them and make a commitment to take the actions that are involved in these 4 features, then we will continue to do better and better in terms of inclusivity. So let's see, I was just kind of thinking about general stages in volunteer engagement that all organizations, no matter what their missions are, no matter what population they serve or who their volunteer base is. These are activities that all of us as volunteer engagement managers do. And there are ways that we can be more proactively and assertively inclusive in these different activities. So first of all, we have the stage of engaging volunteers with disabilities. So this is drawing them into the door in the first place, recruiting them. So it has to do with our messaging, with the visuals that we are putting out into the community, with the tools that we're using to recruit volunteers. And so you can't be passive about any of these activities because it's not going to result in high levels of participation among individuals with disabilities. Your recruitment tools have to be accessible. The representation of volunteers in your messaging and in your visuals, you have to proactively intend to include representation of all different types of people. As well, you have to target. So I'm lucky at SOAR 365 because we have lots of great relationships with disability networks, with corporate partners that have groups focused on disability inclusion. And so you can have the greatest messages in the world and the most accessible tools, but if you're not intentionally developing partnerships and relationships with different groups of individuals with disabilities, then you're not going to get them through the door. Accessible onboarding process, of course, meaning everything from physical accessibility to everything, every element of the environment has to be accessible. Is online training provided? Well, guess what? Since March, I think a lot of my colleagues, as well as myself, have decided that we need to put our training online. And so that's something that I'm working on right now. And I know a lot of people are as well. And that online training is a step forward in realizing your efforts to be more inclusive. And then finally, you can pilot if you don't have any volunteers who have disabilities, but you want to try something, you can pilot an opportunity with a staff champion. Fortunately, I'm surrounded by staff champions at SOAR 365. So this is not really a struggle for me, and I'm very thankful about that. Another activity, so once we get volunteers in through the door, we get them trained, we prepare them for their service, then they have to be actively managed. And so there are different activities involved in this set of activities. And I mentioned this before, being person-centered. I think that's the single most important thing. You just focus on the person who is performing their volunteer service. What do they need? What are their strengths? I mean, these are things that we do with the people that we serve at SOAR 365 all the time. Who are they as a human being? What are they good at? What skills do they possess? What are their desires and goals and preferences? And also, of course, you know, what accommodations and support, if any, do they need? So that person-centeredness, I think, is really a core concept for inclusive volunteer engagement. What does the person need to be successful? I ask this of every single volunteer that I work with. What do you need to be successful? What type of supervision works best for you? To make sure that there's alignment between what I am trying to provide for them and what they need to get from me. And then for volunteers needing support, consider the possibility of creating a new volunteer opportunity like a buddy or a mentoring sort of arrangement. So that's managing volunteers with disabilities. And then the third set of activities that I wanted to touch on real briefly is retaining volunteers with disabilities. And again, these are all activities that I do with every volunteer that we engage at SOAR 365. Frequent check-ins. How are you doing? Do you feel good about what you're doing? Do you understand the impact that you're making with your service? Making sure to measure and communicate that impact, not just to the volunteer, but to everybody, both internally and externally to the organization. Kind of emphasizing the message that the volunteers that we engage, whether they have disabilities or not, they are having an impact on our mission and our goals for serving the community. Appropriate formal and informal recognition strategies and making sure it's a win-win for everyone. These are things that I do with every one of my volunteers, both those who have disabilities and those who do not have disabilities. So since March, we have been in this strange, crazy virtual environment, and we've all been trying to figure out how to be effective volunteer managers in the virtual world. And of course, we at SOAR 365, as well as, you know, most organizations everywhere, we have really made an effort to offer more virtual and skilled pro bono opportunities. And what I can say is the more, the better. We have found that these types of opportunities are able to attract much more diversity in terms of who applies, who is interested, who has the skills to meet these requirements. And so even after COVID, when we are, you know, all able to kind of go back to quote unquote normal, we intend to continue to offer as many virtual and skilled pro bono opportunities as we possibly can. And that is with the intention of continuing to engage as great a diversity of volunteers as possible. So that is really the extent of what I was going to talk about. I have a list of resources, and there are, of course, many. There are many resources available. These are some very good ones that I refer to kind of frequently. So first of all, the Virginia Office on Volunteerism and Service, they have many links, multiple links with information about being more inclusive with your volunteer engagement efforts, being more disability inclusive, the 25 tips for facilitating disability inclusion in your program. That's a 4-page tip sheet. Engaging Persons with Disabilities and Service, that is a 19-page report. Making Volunteer Opportunities Inclusive, that's a 2-page fact sheet. So it really depends. You know, there are some very long, in-depth resources that are available. And then there are very short, you know, 2-page, 4-page fact sheets. Removing Barriers for Volunteering is another fact sheet that is 2 pages long. And then the one that I really like the most and that I refer to very frequently is Supporting Volunteerism by People with Disabilities. It's a 23-page guidebook. And you can download the whole thing. And I have, like I said, I have a handout that I made available to Valerie. And so I'm assuming that all you have to do is get in touch with Valerie, or you can get in touch with me, and I will be happy to share that page of resources with you. So Valerie, that's really all that I was going to talk about today. So I'm going to stop sharing. There we go.
I know I enjoyed it. I'm not quite sure if the individuals watching enjoyed it, but I know I did. Thank you so much for all of that, so much informative information. I appreciate it very much. I've learned a lot of things. Next up we have Jessica Weber. Jessica is from the Goodwill industry in Fredericksburg. Jessica, you can start screen sharing, and there you are.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk on this panel today. I love how Allison started introducing the terminology of inclusive volunteering. I have been fortunate enough to be on both sides of the coin. I spent several years as a volunteer coordinator, and I completely understand all the challenges, the many hats you wear. I have recently, over the last 9 years, been on the other side of that coin as a disability advocate, helping individuals who want to volunteer with various barriers find community organizations that are a good fit. And so there really is a third part of this coin that is challenging both parties here. And so that is this idea of public policy is heavily promoting and changing at the federal and state level, as well as local, the push to create inclusive volunteer opportunities. So as a coordinator, you will probably hear more phone calls, more people reaching out that you haven't heard from before. As an advocate, you are really striving and approaching new organizations that may have never been successful with inclusive volunteering or are newly introduced to this concept and really trying to shine a new light on it. I work at Rappahannock Goodwill Industries, and since 2016, they've operated a community integrated day program. We are by far very unique in the state in that our program is fully 100% focused on placing people in volunteer opportunities. And so what that means is through volunteering, people do a lot of skill building, they become an integrated part of their community, and eventually many of our folks graduate, over 75%, and gain the skills to find employment in their community. So I'm here to share some examples I've learned throughout the years from both sides of the coin. There are a lot of techniques. Always consider the fact, no matter where you are on this coin, the overarching advantage. These don't necessarily always specifically are just helpful for individuals with disabilities. They should help improve their performance across your organization and improve volunteer retention. They increase retention as well as outcomes and efficiencies. And ultimately, you want your volunteers, if they're helpful and beneficial to your organization, to come back time and time again to make long-term commitments. So some of the examples I have, Allison talked about onboarding. Onboarding is extremely important, and you may have teams that come and visit your organization. I have very small teams. It's 1 staff member to 3 volunteers. And we expect our volunteers to go through the full onboarding that any volunteer would do at the organization they're interested in. What we do is we work with those organizations to make it inclusive friendly. So if you think of your normal handbook, it's often very heavy with text. And we have this great example from Greater Fredericksburg Habitat of Humanity. They took apart their handbook and made it very visually appealing so that individuals who might not necessarily have strong reading skills can understand and gain more during the orientation. They've actually taken this a step further. We help them pilot a completely online orientation process. So they actually recorded an online video where someone would speak about their entire process and even included photographs of their staff. So new individuals could learn names and faces of people before they even came on site. Another example, we all love Pinterest, but this is very simple. We all have areas in our organization or in our homes that aren't that very well organized. And that's extremely difficult when you have individuals who might struggle with critical thinking skills. So to pair them with areas that you need an organizational scheme that everyone can learn and adopt, as well as challenging them to help maintain it, is a great project that will improve the efficiency at your organization. On here are 2 great examples. One of the biggest challenges I hear from both sides of the coin of volunteering is we're not quite getting the right outcome. Coordinators are struggling with the volunteers that come in to be productive, and disability advocates are saying we're having a challenge communicating with our partners. So on the left is an example of a task analysis, which is basically a series of instructions to show someone how to complete a volunteer duty. In this case, it's how to essentially clean a particular area in a hospital gift shop. This task, even this project of making these steps, you can give to a group that's coming into your organization and say, hey, I will sit down with you, we'll learn the steps together, and challenge them to create the task analysis for you. It takes some extra effort off your back. On the right side of the screen is actually a volunteer site agreement. This is something we use when we talk to community partners to explain our standards of operation and what they should expect from us. And it's actually several pages long. It gives us a chance to have a dialogue with an organization and agree to what we should come in and do and how we should act and how we're going to do it. We've even managed to slip in some health and safety to benefit community organizations. Everyone has those first aid kits laying around, but no one really has the time to check them. So we teach individuals with disabilities how to check those kits. They learn from them and they turn in a checklist to the organization so they know they always have something current in case of an emergency. Allison talked about how having choices is extremely important. And when you're reaching out to individuals with disabilities, you really can't just rely on social media. You need to go out and find these organizations. You need to go into schools. You need to find different mediums to communicate your message and what you're looking for. I always challenge volunteer coordinators. I know you are very busy. Have your secret list of special projects, and it can be pages long. When a disability advocate comes to you, they're looking for that special list because they usually have people on there who can spend hours doing a project. I'll never forget, I went to an organization and a coordinator pulled out a closet of photos, and it was like 15 boxes of photos they needed archived. And I happened to have a group of volunteers who wanted to learn how to use a copier and weren't very strong in reading and writing, but they could compare these pictures for hours and archive them and scan them. And they loved it. They did it for almost 3 months. And she was so happy about having volunteers who would dedicate their time consistently to finish that project. Job descriptions and lists of expectations is also important. I do want to spend some time on volunteer virtual opportunities. I was fortunate enough in March to get this right off the ground in our organization very quickly during COVID. Some examples we've used are with Spotsylvania Regional Medical Center. We don't just have our volunteers make cards. They actually, on a bi-weekly basis, would get together with the volunteer board or their volunteer team, and they'd come up with a theme for the week. They'd share examples of what should be on the card or phrases and pictures. And many individuals really loved the project because not only did they get to converse with other volunteers they couldn't physically see, but they are also at home working on vocational skills, reading and writing, as well as it kind of gave them homework. So they would dedicate, I'm going to do so many cards in a week. And they would have not only that face-to-face, but homework to do essentially to contribute. We do primarily use a lot of Zoom, and we found some volunteer organizations are kind of closed right now, but they're trying to stay in touch. So just offering the opportunity for someone to converse with others during the week is extremely valuable and engaging. The last opportunity I wanted to bring up is with COVID, many agencies are trying to figure out how to go virtual. And I give this simple example again at Greater Fredericksburg Habitat for Humanity, because people were not coming in the store, they built essentially an online presence. And they're trying with reduced staff to operate their agency, but also run an online store essentially. And so it's another great virtual volunteer opportunity. People can learn. It's great skills, computer building, skill building, teamwork, using the phone, learning how to do research online. So it's wonderful. Finally, the last piece I just want to remind people is ultimately the biggest part of volunteering is about building some kind of relationship and connection. I still have folks who volunteered 2 years ago that come to their community site and pop in every once in a while and say hi. It's that kind of connection I like to see as a disability advocate. So visit with volunteers, get a lot of feedback, identify really strong mentors who would be good partners for individuals with disabilities at the agency or help champion the group. Provide open and honest feedback. You know, if there's awkward communication or someone's learning to be really social and engaging in the organization, learn how to have an attitude of frankness and humor so that people learn and grow together. And embrace teamwork. I will share and close with this story. I had a young man who started volunteering at an agency, and the coordinator came to him and they said, what can I do to make your experience so much better? And this young man loved t-shirts. And this organization had many volunteer t-shirts. So they actually changed their system. So you volunteer for so many hours, you earn a t-shirt. And it has been a live and die, a reward for many of my folks over the years. That is a new kind of permanent badge of honor they get to earn. So thank you very much for your time, Valerie.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. That was very informative. Yes, Caroline, let me introduce to you now, Caroline Gimbelman, last but not least. She is one of dLCV's very own volunteers. Yay, Caroline.
Thank you. Hello. And again, thank you for asking me to do this. Yes, I am going to present a snapshot of what it looks like volunteering with the dLCV and maybe how some changes have happened since COVID came into our lives. So very briefly, I became connected with the dLCV many years ago by joining the PIME Council, which is Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness. So we come together by grace of Zoom now, remotely, as sometimes consumers of mental health services ourselves. We are caregivers, we are guardians, we are family members of individuals with mental illness. So the council comes together and it provides direction and input to the staff of the dLCV, to the attorneys and so forth. The input is useful, but the input is very crucial because this gives insight into what mental health services look like. What is the mental health service situation across the Commonwealth? Because dLCV, if you remember, it is statewide. So dLCV is just as interested in Northern Virginia as Southwest Virginia is Tidewater, and you can get a very different picture. So the volunteers are crucial to give that view. And with these views, the staff can then formulate strategies and goals for the organization. My personal journey started 28 years ago when I was appointed by the federal government as my father's representative payee. And moving forward today, for now 5 years or so, I've been my brother's guardian, and he is in a Virginia facility with a mental health diagnosis. So a lot of us have a very personal connection, and that's sometimes how we do become involved with volunteer organizations, is through these personal connections. And over the years, I've become more involved with dLCV, as Valerie knows, and especially even during COVID times. So as businesses have had to adapt, we've seen this at the dLCV. If you can imagine an organization like this adjusting to COVID, virtual and distance situations. But it's never changed its mission, and I think that's probably the same for each of our organizations. dLCV is still committed to improving and protecting the lives of Virginians with disabilities, and that doesn't change just because we have COVID. For example, the dLCV has shifted to monitor mental health facilities and group homes. It collects data on the COVID cases. Where have they been diagnosed? Where do we see clusters? Are these compromised individuals receiving appropriate services? So this is something that that's again had to shift within the organization and incorporate into it. dLCV is extending its attention concerning broadband and internet access across the state. We know the Commonwealth has different internet access in different areas, and certainly that has deepened, has broadened. There's more of a burden on the system with that. We have educational needs for individuals all across the state. We've heard of mental health concerns growing during these times of isolation and adjustment. So telecounseling is very crucial. So we're focusing now on how can we enhance this throughout the state. On a light note, for example, the dLCV even changed to its gala to a virtual one this year. So it was all done remotely and organized remotely, and largely, I will say, with the support and help of many volunteers. So all these different ways that you see volunteers creep in that you might not have thought. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Virginia looks. How can we volunteer for a better Virginia? And that's something that, how is this working? How would we approach this from the dLCV? For example, if you're looking at it to become a volunteer, why volunteer? How does it help you? Well, most of us have a personal reason at the dLCV why we become connected with the dLCV. If you feel alone in your views and your experiences, you'll find you're not alone and you will be heard there. You bring valuable knowledge. What is the reality in the community? The dLCV is very focused on what the community looks like because they are very different across our Commonwealth. Investing time in the dLCV will connect you with people who share your views. That's something that we just heard from Jessica, is building that connection, that often when you're bringing volunteers in and all that, you find a common ground. Remember, this is the law center too. So the dLCV attorneys are working with what is happening in the legislature of Virginia. What are the issues of mental health, human rights, and other topics? How is that being handled in the legislature? And as you work with the dLCV, you'll learn to understand those things better, and you've sort of learned through osmosis with some of that. It's very, very enlightening. You will find out, you will understand perhaps how disabilities are viewed across the state of Virginia. And you'll find that there are other organizations, just like today. We've now had two, oops, this is not good. We've had two wonderful organizations brought to light that when you work with one, you start to learn about others. And there may be organizations out there that personally will benefit you. And just by being involved, you find this out. You'll also find that advocacy, and that's something I think that is big in any organization that uses volunteerism, and definitely when you're dealing with special needs situations, any kind of disabilities, the advocacy is a strong piece. And when you work in an organization, when you're involved where advocacy is such a topic, you'll find your own skills definitely become enhanced. And if you're developing, we also heard this from the other speakers, is that when you are volunteering and involved in this, it's amazing how you can develop a professional life. You can develop skills that are transferable to other environments. So it's quite a benefit. So if you're volunteering, how does it help the dLCV? So what are you bringing to an organization? Volunteers, it's very valuable what they bring, and whatever they bring doesn't have to be within the four walls of the office, because of course we are in a different world right now. Views and experiences that you bring to an organization as a volunteer to the dLCV, it helps them direct their efforts. It shows what services look like across the Commonwealth, not just in Richmond. So it's interesting for us at least to have people from different corners of the state again to see what are the experiences elsewhere. Volunteers often add the reality to an organization. They really do. They come in with their own intentions, with their own thoughts, their own backgrounds, and it really adds the reality to what you're doing, especially when you're dealing in a disability setting, I think. We all have strengths, we have abilities, we have challenges in certain areas. And with each person that the dLCV works, it broadens the staff's ability to work with other people of different talents, different backgrounds, different needs. So when that person comes in, someone may have a way of doing something or a way of getting something done. And that could be incredibly beneficial to the next situation, because perhaps the way you do it, how you get it done, is going to be wonderful and a great way for someone else who might come along as well.
Caroline, I'm gonna stop you right quick. It's like a minute left and this thing cuts off at 4:30. I have no control over that. So
all right.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about
I was
that.
trying to talk as fast as I could.
I know, I'm so sorry.
All right. Well, we were going to talk about volunteering and how to fit people in at the dLCV, which does a wonderful way to put people where they have their talents, where they have their interest, and to accommodate different situations. As far as we have people who might not like people comments and enjoyment with the groups, but we have a lot of individual things. So hopefully, if you're out there, if you're an interested volunteer, you'll reach out to the dLCV, and we hope to see you. And thank you everyone for taking part.